A rainy night in Seoul, a lost girl, a man no one dares to look directly in the eye. As Nyla Brooks desperately hides behind that stranger, unbeknownst to her, that decision would change her entire life. Like and comment on the city you're viewing right now to let me know how far this story has come. Don't leave, because from here on, things won't be the way they seem. The rain hit Seoul the way it always did in late October. Sideways, mean, without apology. Nyla Brooks pushed through the glass door of Club Elysian at 11:43 at night and immediately regretted the heels she'd worn. 3 inches. Borrowed from a colleague back in New York who'd said they make you look like you belong somewhere. Standing on the wet pavement of Gangnam-gu, canvas bag digging into her shoulder, camera strap biting the back of her neck, Nyla felt like she belonged nowhere on earth. The assignment had gone wrong 2 hours in. She was supposed to photograph Park Jin-woo, a rising fashion executive, for a lifestyle spread commissioned by a Seoul-based magazine that had found her through her Instagram portfolio. Simple enough, corporate gloss, a little nightlife atmosphere. The kind of work she could knock out in 3 hours and use to pay 2 weeks of hostel rent. What she hadn't been told was that Park Jin-woo was celebrating a business deal, that his group would consume 4 bottles of Johnny Walker Blue before she arrived, and that one of his associates, a red-faced man in an ill-fitting suit who kept insisting she call him Director Choi, would put his hand on her camera and suggest she might want to make the evening more personal if she wanted to get paid. She'd walked out without the shot, without the money, with her hands still shaking. The street outside the club was all neon and wet concrete, the kind of scene she would have photographed if her chest wasn't coiled tight with something between fury and exhaustion. Seoul did that to her sometimes. Made everything look cinematic right when she felt least equipped to appreciate it. Red lanterns blurring in puddles, taxi headlights cutting white strips across the rain, the distant bass thump from the club behind her fading as she moved away from the entrance. She pulled out her phone to call a car. No signal. The screen blinked and died. Battery. She hadn't charged it since morning. Nyla pressed her eyes shut for exactly 2 seconds, a trick she'd learned from her mother, who called it resetting without drama, and then opened them and looked for a GS25 or a cafe or anything with a sign in both Korean and English. Her Korean extended to annyeonghaseyo, 감사합니다, and how to order a rice cake without pointing. Navigating Gangnam on foot at midnight in the rain was not part of the itinerary. She'd been walking maybe 4 minutes when she heard them. 3 men, maybe 4. Somewhere behind her, close, the specific kind of laughter that wasn't about anything funny. She'd heard that sound before, outside a bar in Detroit when she was 19, walking home from a friend's place. She'd learned then that the pitch of it, that rising, loose-edged sound, meant they'd already made a decision about her. She kept walking, didn't look back. Their footsteps accelerated. She turned left at the corner, faster now, the heels clicking against the pavement in an irregular rhythm that gave away every bit of her fear. The street she'd turned onto was narrower, darker, the neon signs thinning out. A mistake. She knew it immediately. She'd gone away from the crowd instead of toward it, some panicked animal logic overriding everything her brain was trying to tell her. Ya jamgan man. Hey, wait a minute. She didn't stop. A hand closed around her arm. She spun, yanked back, took 3 steps and her heel caught a gap in the pavement, and she went down hard onto one knee, canvas bag hitting the ground, camera clattering against the concrete inside it and making a sound that shot straight through her sternum. She scrambled up before they could close the distance, but they were already surrounding her, 4 of them, ties loosened, the smell of alcohol and cologne cutting through the rain. One of them was grinning. One was saying something low and deliberate in Korean that she couldn't translate but didn't need to. The grinning one reached for her bag. She pulled it back. Don't. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Single syllable, flat. Her mother's voice, actually, the one that had once stopped a landlord mid-sentence. But these men weren't stopping. The grinning one's hand was still extended, palm up, like she'd misunderstood the situation, and he was patiently waiting for her to correct herself. That was when she saw him. Across the street, standing absolutely still beneath the overhang of a closed pharmacy, black coat, dark hair slicked by rain, hands at his sides. Not watching her. That was the strange part. He wasn't watching the scene unfold. He was simply there, the way a building is there, occupying space with complete indifference to whether it was observed. Nyla didn't think. There was no calculation. She crossed the street in 4 steps and put herself directly behind his left shoulder, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off him in the cold air. "Please," her voice dropped. "Help me." He didn't move for a long moment. Then he turned his head slightly, enough to look at the 4 men across the narrow street, and he did nothing else. No step forward, no hand raised, no sound from his mouth. He looked at them the way you might look at something you were mildly deciding whether to address: a loose thread, an unopened piece of mail, something entirely beneath urgency. The laughter stopped. The grinning one's smile dissolved in stages, like ice in warm water. His hand came down. The one to his left said something to the others in a hissed undertone, and then they were backing up, not in a rush, but with the stiff, deliberate movement of men trying to look like they were leaving on their own terms when every muscle in their bodies was screaming at them to run. Within 30 seconds, they were gone, around the corner, absorbed by the city. Nyla didn't move from behind his shoulder. Her knee was bleeding where she'd hit the pavement. She could feel it now, warm and slow, soaking into her stocking. Her camera? She needed to check her camera. She didn't check it. She stood there with rain coming down around them both and tried to slow her breathing into something that didn't announce every frightened thing happening inside her chest. "Thank you," she said. English, automatic. He turned to look at her fully then. He was younger than she'd expected. Mid-30s, maybe? Though there was something in his eyes that made age feel irrelevant. A quality of stillness that didn't come from youth, or even from experience, but from something she couldn't name on 4 seconds of observation. His face was angular, expressionless, not hostile, not warm, simply arranged, the way a landscape is arranged, indifferent to how it reads. He said nothing. From somewhere behind her she heard engines. More than one, multiple vehicles, the deep rumble of powerful SUVs, and when she turned, 3 of them had rolled to the curb in a perfect line, black and identical, water sheeting off their hoods. The doors opened. Men got out. 8, 10, 12, dressed in dark suits moving with coordinated efficiency, spreading into a loose perimeter. And then something that struck Nyla as the strangest thing she had witnessed in 29 years of life. Every single one of them, upon reaching a certain proximity to the man beside her, lowered their heads in unison. Not a bow exactly, not servile, but the specific deferential tilt of people who understood who they were standing near. "Mr. Seo-hyun," one of them, older, a slight scar at the edge of his jaw, spoke quietly and handed the man something Nyla couldn't see. The man, Seo-hyun, received it without looking down. His eyes stayed on Nyla for another 3 seconds, and she had the distinct skin-prickling sensation of being assessed the way a person might assess a problem that had materialized unexpectedly, not with malice, just with the flat analytical attention of someone who made decisions about difficult things for a living. Then he looked away. "Get her a car," he said. His English was precise, accented, each word placed with deliberate weight. He said it to the man with the scar jaw, not to her. And then he walked to the middle SUV and got in, and the door closed, and the convoy pulled away from the curb smoothly and silently, like it had never been there. Nyla stood in the rain with 12 strangers who wouldn't meet her eyes and felt the particular vertigo of a moment that her brain couldn't fully process yet. She didn't know his name. Not yet. By morning, she would. The hostel was a narrow building in Mapo-gu, 3 floors, yellow walls, the kind of place that charged by the week and didn't ask questions. Nyla had been staying there for 11 days. Her room was on the 2nd floor, small enough that she could touch both walls if she stretched, which she didn't because the gesture would have felt too much like measuring a cell. She sat on the edge of the bed with her camera in her lap and went through the footage with the methodical focus she retreated to whenever the rest of her was shaking. The Fujifilm had survived the fall. The body had a new scrape along the bottom plate that she ran her thumb over several times without meaning to. The lens was clean. She exhaled through her nose. The photographs from earlier in the evening were garbage. Overexposed party shots, Park Jin-woo's group mid-laugh, Director Choi's red face looming in one corner of a frame she'd never use. She deleted them one by one, clinical about it, the small satisfaction of erasure. She stopped on a series she'd taken earlier in the day, before the assignment, when she'd gone down to Mapo Bridge at golden hour because the light was doing something extraordinary over the Han River, and she couldn't not. Those were good. Those were the reason she was here, really. Not the editorial work, which paid but didn't sustain her in the way that mattered. She'd been a travel photographer for 4 years, freelance, the kind of living that looked romantic from the outside and felt like controlled freefall from within. She'd shot 31 countries. She'd sold work to 3 magazines that mattered and a dozen that paid her rent. She had a savings account that she checked weekly with an expression her roommate back in Brooklyn had once described as the face of someone defusing a bomb. Her father had wanted her to finish the nursing degree. Her mother had said, "Go, go, you have enough time to be practical later." Her mother had died 2 years ago, cancer, swift and completely without warning. And now Nyla carried that permission everywhere with her like a compass she couldn't quite read in the dark. She put the camera down, cleaned the scrape on her knee with a damp cloth, and a packet of antiseptic from her kit and lay back without undressing. She thought about the man, the way the other men had moved around him, the way those 4 drunks had looked at him and something animal in them had understood something that Nyla hadn't. She'd spent enough time in enough cities to know what that kind of deference looked like, what it meant in the posture of men who carried guns on their hips under their jackets and kept their backs to the wall and watched every approach. She wasn't naive. She'd been in Medellin, in Tbilisi, in the outer districts of Lagos. She knew what proximity to dangerous power felt like, the specific gravity of it, the way a room or a street changed when someone who held that kind of authority walked in. She told herself it didn't matter. She was leaving in 4 days. She had a flight to Tokyo already booked, a hostel already paid, a contact at a documentary collective who wanted to talk to her about a 6-month project in Southeast Asia. 4 days. She closed her eyes and slept badly. She was up at 5:30. Old habit. Her body had never learned to sleep past dawn, a fact she'd inherited from her father, who woke before the sun out of some deep-seated Protestant conviction that rest beyond a certain point was a form of dishonesty. By 6, she had her camera and was on the first subway toward Yongsan. She'd read about the shipping terminals on the western edge of the district, where the old industrial infrastructure met the river and the city's money hadn't reached yet. The kind of place that still had texture, rust and cranes, and men arriving before light to move things that needed to be moved. She'd been meaning to shoot it for a week and kept postponing in favor of the easier, more photographable parts of the city. The light at that hour was extraordinary, low and gray, filtering through industrial mist off the water, turning everything it touched into something almost mythic. She moved through the terminal perimeter along the public access road, shooting through chain link at stacked containers, at cranes suspended against the clouded sky, at a man in an orange vest pushing a cart that left trails in the wet gravel. She was deep in the rhythm of it, that specific absorption that made her forget hunger, cold, the soreness in her knee, when she heard voices. Not workers. The cadence was wrong, too low, too clipped, the kind of conversation that was designed not to carry. She moved without thinking, photographer's reflex, following the sound to a gap in the container wall where a rusted access door had been propped open. Through the gap, she could see a cleared space between 3 massive shipping containers, makeshift shelter from the morning sky, and in that space were men, 6 of them. A table with documents and a laptop, 2 others facing them, harder in posture, unfamiliar. And one of the first 6 was talking in a way that made the others go very still. Nyla raised her camera. She shot in silence. 12 frames. The light was perfect. She would think about that later with something close to horror. The way the morning illuminated the scene with such clarity, the faces, the documents spread across the table, the exchange of what appeared to be a hard drive between 2 hands. She shot it all with the automatic competence of years of muscle memory, completely separated from the part of her brain that was beginning to understand what she might be looking at. Then one of the men turned, not toward her, toward something else, some noise beyond the perimeter. But the turn put his face directly into the light and into her lens. And Nyla got 2 frames of it before the instinct she'd been ignoring finally flooded through her, and she stepped back from the gap and pressed herself flat against the container wall, her heart making itself known against her ribs. She waited 30 seconds, a minute. No one came. She walked back toward the access road at a pace that took every discipline she had not to break into a run. And when she reached the main path, she did walk faster, faster, until she was at the terminal gate and through it and on the street outside, where a delivery truck was parked and a woman was walking a small white dog, and the ordinary morning of the city was carrying on with perfect indifference to whatever Nyla had just stumbled into. She didn't look at the photographs until she was back at the hostel with the door locked. When she did, she sat with her hand over her mouth for a long time. She recognized one of the faces. Not from her own life, from the news, from the English-language Seoul Daily she'd been reading online during her first week here. A photograph and a story about a government infrastructure contract, a deputy minister. What was his name? She scrolled back through her memory with growing dread. Deputy Minister An Tae-soo, Public Works and Urban Development. Sitting at a table inside a shipping container at 6 in the morning, exchanging a hard drive with men whose posture said something about them that no public works meeting required. Nyla put the camera down. She needed to think. She needed to think clearly and carefully and not do anything fast because she'd made the mistake of acting on panic the night before and had ended up sheltering behind a man who turned out to be... She picked up her phone, which she'd charged overnight, and did something she'd been telling herself wasn't necessary. She searched his name, Jun Seo-hyun. She'd caught it from the way the man with the scar jaw had said it in the rain. She'd turned it over in her mind through the thin hours of sleep. The results loaded. She read them again, sat with the phone in both hands and the silence of the hostel room filling up around her with something very cold. Jun Seo-hyun, 41, chairman of Seo Capital Group, legitimate holding company spanning real estate, logistics, and private security. Also, and the language here was careful, the journalism hedged with alleged and reportedly and sources within law enforcement have indicated, believed to be the operational head of the SEO organization, a criminal syndicate controlling the largest underground financial network in South Korea. 3 investigations over 12 years. No charges. No arrests. One prosecutor who had built a case against him had resigned abruptly in 2019 and relocated to Canada. The man had looked at 4 drunk strangers and made them run without saying a word. Nyla set the phone on the bed and pressed both palms against her thighs. Outside, Seoul was fully awake now, the noise of the morning city rising through the window, the ordinary pressure of millions of lives moving through their ordinary morning. She had 12 photographs of a deputy minister conducting what appeared to be an illegal transaction at a shipping terminal. She had spent the night under the protection, however brief, however incidental, of the man those investigators couldn't touch. She did not yet know that by the time darkness fell that night, someone at that shipping terminal would have pulled their security footage, identified her face on the access road, and that 2 men carrying weapons she'd never seen up close would begin making inquiries at hostels in Mapogu. She did not know any of that yet. She was just sitting on a narrow bed in a yellow-walled room, trying to decide whether to delete 12 photographs or keep them, and the specific weight of that decision was already changing the shape of everything that came. After 3 minutes of sitting with her hands pressed flat against her thighs, Nyla made the decision the way she made most decisions that mattered, not by thinking it through to a clean conclusion, but by noticing that she'd already made it and was just waiting for her body to catch up. She kept the photographs. She transferred them from the camera card to the encrypted folder on her laptop, the one she used for sensitive assignment material, set a 6-digit passcode, and then sat looking at the 12 images on her screen with the specific sick clarity of someone who understood they had just made a problem for themselves. The deputy minister's face, the hard drive changing hands, the documents spread across that improvised table like they were in a boardroom instead of a gap between shipping containers at dawn. She closed the laptop, put the camera back in her bag, drank a glass of water standing at the small sink in the corner of the room. Then she left the hostel because staying in the small room was going to do something bad to her head. She found a cafe 3 blocks south, the kind that catered to students and early morning workers, plastic chairs and laminated menus, and a woman behind the counter who spoke no English and didn't need to because Nyla pointed at the photograph of an Americano and held up one finger and the transaction completed itself. She sat at the window with the coffee and her notebook and tried to write down what she was going to do next in the logical, sequential way that her college roommate had called Nyla's emergency procedures, a list-making habit she fell back on when the larger shape of a situation became too difficult to hold all at once. She wrote, "Don't contact the magazine. They'd sent her into a room with Director Choi and hadn't warned her about him. She didn't owe them anything. She wrote, "Don't post anything. Obvious." She wrote, "Talk to someone." She stared at that one. She didn't have contacts in Seoul, not real ones. She had the colleague who'd lent her the heels back in New York, who covered arts and culture and would have no framework for this. She had her father, who would tell her to go to the American embassy immediately and then spend the rest of the call catastrophizing. She had a friend from her Tbilisi period who worked for a wire service and would probably understand but was currently somewhere in Eastern Europe and 7 time zones away. She crossed out "talk to someone" and wrote beneath it, "Figure out who those other men were." She was still looking at that when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Korean prefix. She stared at it through 3 full rings before she picked up. "Miss Brooks?" The voice was male, accented, careful. Not the voice from the rain. A different voice. Older. Measured in the way of someone who had spent years making uncertain people feel the full weight of what they were about to hear. "My name is Han. I work for Mr. Seo Hyun. We would like to speak with you." The cold moved through her chest like water finding its level. "How did you get this number?" "That's a secondary concern right now." A pause. "There is a car outside your cafe. Gray Kia. The driver's name is Minho. He won't touch you. He won't speak to you. He will simply bring you somewhere safe. I am asking you to come." "You're asking?" "Yes." "What happens if I say no?" Another pause, longer this time, and in that pause, Nyla heard the thing he wasn't saying more clearly than anything he was. "Then you walk back to your hostel in Mapogu, and we have this conversation in approximately 6 hours, under circumstances that will be less comfortable for you. The men who were inquiring about you this morning at 2 hostels on your street are not associated with Mr. Seo Hyun." Her fingers went tight around the phone. She looked out the window. Gray Kia. Parked at the curb, engine off, a young man in the driver's seat looking straight ahead with the rigid composure of someone who had been told not to make eye contact under any circumstances. 6 hours, she said. Possibly less. She picked up her coffee, finished it, and left. They brought her to a building in Seongdong-gu that looked from the outside like an architectural firm. Glass and brushed steel, tasteful. A lobby with a receptionist who glanced up when Nyla walked in and then looked back at her screen without visible interest. The man named Han was waiting by the elevator, late 50s, gray at his temples, the scar along his jaw that she recognized from the night before. Up close it was older than she'd thought, the kind of scar that had healed decades ago and become simply part of a face. He didn't offer his hand. "Your knee," he said, looking at the bandage visible below her jeans. "I'm fine." "Mr. Seo Hyun will see you on the 14th floor." The elevator was silent. Nyla watched the numbers and kept her breathing even and thought about the 12 photographs on her encrypted drive and whether she'd been stupid to keep them or whether she was about to discover she'd been stupid to keep them here, in this city, within reach of the man whose name appeared in every 3rd sentence of those hedged, careful news articles. The 14th floor was not what she expected. No visible security, no weapons, no atmosphere of menace. A long room with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the river. Natural light filling the space. Sparse furniture chosen with the austere precision of someone who had decided long ago that excess was a form of distraction. 1 desk, 2 chairs, a credenza with a laptop and a phone. Jun Seo Hyun was standing at the window with his back to her. He was dressed the same way she imagined he always dressed. Dark, expensive, understated, no jewelry. He turned when she entered and looked at her with the same flat assessing quality she'd registered in the rain, and she thought, he looks exactly like someone who has never once in his life been surprised by what a person turned out to be. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand." Something in his expression shifted. Not irritation exactly. More the adjustment a person makes when a variable behaves differently than modeled. He moved from the window to the chair behind the desk, sat, and set his hands flat on the surface in a gesture she read as deliberate, an indication that they were going to have a conversation rather than something else. "You were at the Yongsan terminal this morning." Not a question. She didn't treat it like one. "I was on the public access road." "You photographed what was happening inside the eastern yard." Neela said nothing. The silence between them had texture, resistance. "Miss Brooks?" He said her name the same way he'd said everything else, placed carefully, no inflection wasted. I'm not asking you whether you took those photographs. I know you did. I'm telling you that the people you photographed are dangerous in a way that has nothing to do with me and everything to do with your immediate safety. Who are they? People who have been watching that terminal for 3 months. People who, as of approximately 90 minutes ago, have your image from a security camera on the access road and are currently working to identify you. He paused. They already have your hostel. The cold again, lower this time, settling. What do they want? They want to know what you saw. After that, they want to make certain you can't tell anyone. He said it with no dramatic weight, just information delivered at the correct temperature. These are not men who leave loose ends. Nyla put both hands on the back of the empty chair across from him and pressed down hard enough to feel the resistance in her palms. So what is this? You're offering to protect me. Yes. Why? He looked at her steadily. Because you were in my proximity last night, which means the men who identified you on that camera will connect you to me, which means your situation has become my problem. That's very practical. Yes. Not I feel responsible or I want to help. Just, your situation is my problem. Would you prefer I lie to you? She almost laughed. It came up from somewhere unexpected, and she pressed it back down because this wasn't a room for that. Not yet. No, she said. I'd prefer you didn't have to be involved at all. That window is closed. She looked at him for a long moment. He met it without any visible discomfort, the way a wall meets pressure. She thought, this man has sat across from people who wanted him dead and had this exact conversation. She thought, I have 12 photographs of something he might want for himself. She thought, I have no idea what I've walked into. If I stay, she said, yes. I keep my camera, my equipment, my autonomy. I'm not a prisoner. You're not a prisoner. And the photographs are mine. Something moved behind his eyes. Brief, controlled, gone before she could read it. The photographs are yours. She pulled out the chair and sat. Hans set her up in a room on the 12th floor. Clean, spare, one window facing a courtyard, a ensuite bathroom with actual toiletries, a lock on the inside of the door that she tested twice. Not a cell, technically, but she noted that the elevator required a key card she didn't have, and the stairwell doors were monitored. She noted it and filed it and decided that for now, the architecture of the situation was less important than the fact that she was alive, and the men who'd inquired about her at the hostel didn't know where she was. She spent the afternoon working, shot through her Yongsan photographs again, this time frame by frame, building a mental catalog of every face, every document corner she could partially read, every detail visible in the sharp morning light. She wasn't trained for this kind of analysis, but she had what her mother had called the photographer's habit, an automatic, granular attention to what was actually in a frame rather than what you thought you'd seen. The deputy minister. 3 men she didn't recognize. 2 who might be security or might be something else, based on how they stood. And in the far left corner of one frame, partially obscured by a container edge, a figure she'd barely clocked at the time, taller than the others, standing slightly apart, posture different, the particular stillness of someone who was present as an authority rather than a participant. She zoomed. The face was 70% obscured, but the coat, the way the hands were held. She had looked at this person for a total of perhaps 15 seconds in poor light and at emotional extremity, and still something in the image pulled at her with a recognition she couldn't immediately locate. She sat with it, left it alone. Han brought dinner at 7 without being asked. Korean food, simple, a tray with soup and rice, and a small dish of banchan that she ate mechanically while going through her notebook. He didn't linger. He set the tray on the desk and left, and she found herself, somewhere between the 3rd and 4th bite, genuinely grateful for the absence of conversation. She was rinsing her hands at the sink when she heard raised voices from somewhere above her. Not loud. This building seemed constitutionally opposed to loudness, but audible through the ventilation. 2 male voices. One of them Han's measured register, and one of them someone younger, sharper, the consonants hitting harder, the rhythm of genuine anger versus the rhythm of performed authority. She couldn't make out Korean at that speed, but the emotional content was readable enough. It stopped after 2 minutes. She dried her hands and stood at the window, looking at the courtyard below, where a single security light turned the concrete a pale orange. She thought about her father. She thought about the nursing degree she hadn't finished. She thought about her mother saying, "Go, go," with the specific urgency of someone who understood that some permissions have expiration dates. There was a knock. She turned. "Come in." It wasn't Han. The man who opened the door was maybe 30, lean, dressed in a dark turtleneck, with the kind of face that would have been handsome if it weren't arranged around an expression of barely modulated contempt. She hadn't seen him before. He looked at her the way you might look at something that had been left in a place where it had no business being. "You're the photographer," he said. His English was good, American adjacent, the accent of someone who'd watched a great deal of US television and then spent time there. "I'm Nyla." "I know your name." He stepped into the room without being invited and looked around it slowly, assessing, and then looked back at her. "I'm Park Dae-won. I'm Mr. Seo-hyun's Deputy Director of Operations." "Okay. I want to be clear with you about something," he said. "Whatever June told you this morning, he makes decisions quickly when he has incomplete information. He's done it before." His voice was perfectly level, which somehow made the statement worse. "You are an unknown person who appeared in his proximity under convenient circumstances." Nyla felt the particular steadiness that came over her when someone was trying to make her feel small, a kind of cooling, a pulling back of everything extraneous. "You think I'm a plant?" "I think the timing is interesting. I think a man who works for an organization like this one doesn't stay alive by believing in coincidences." His eyes sharpened. "Exactly. But you're talking to me instead of dealing with this through whatever the normal process would be. So either you're not entirely sure, or you want me to know you're watching, or both." She crossed her arms. "Which is it?" He was quiet for a moment. She'd surprised him. She could see it, not dramatically, just the slight recalibration of a person whose opening had landed differently than intended. "Both," he said finally, and there was something in the admission that might have been, in different circumstances, the beginning of respect. He moved toward the door. "Don't go above the 13th floor. There's a lock on this door." "Use it," he said, and was gone. She used it. The second day was worse because nothing happened. She woke early, worked, ate what was brought, spent 2 hours trying to identify the third man in her photograph and hit the same wall every time, the obscured face, the 70% shadow. She did push-ups against the floor because her body needed something to do with its energy, and there was nowhere to walk. She thought about the people looking for her, what they looked like, how many of them there were, whether they'd moved on from Mapogu to a wider search. June came to the room at 2 in the afternoon. He didn't knock. She noted that. He opened the door and looked at her at the desk, and then came in and sat in the chair by the window without being asked, which she also noted. A man who moved through interior spaces as if ownership was always incidentally his. "You talked to Dae-won," he said. "He came here." "I know." A pause. "He has concerns. He made them clear. Dae-won is careful. That's most of his value." He looked at her. "He's not wrong to be careful. He thinks I'm a plant. He thinks the scenario has the structure of one." June set his forearms on his knees and looked at the floor, a gesture she hadn't seen from him before, something more interior. "Do you have the photographs with you?" "Not here." She didn't break eye contact. "They're backed up off-site." He looked up. "Where?" "Somewhere you don't have access to." She watched him process this. "I'm not stupid, Mr. Seo-hyun. I'm in a building I can't leave freely with a man downstairs who thinks I'm an enemy operative. I didn't hand you leverage." Something shifted in his face then, and it wasn't anger. It was the opposite of what she'd expected. Something closer to approval, dry and reluctant, and entirely involuntary. "No," he said. "You didn't. I need to know what those men were doing at that terminal." "Not yet." "That's not yet means I'll tell you when the risk of telling you is lower." He stood. "It's not a permanent refusal." She stood too, because sitting while he stood felt like something she wasn't willing to do. The man in the back left corner of the container yard, partially obscured, tall, standing apart from the others. His stillness changed quality. Very slightly, almost undetectable, like the surface tension of water just before it breaks. I don't have a clear face, she said, but the posture is specific, and the coat. She watched him. Do you know who I'm describing? He looked at her for a long time. Yes, he said. And the way he said it, flat, controlled, with the particular weight of someone who had just heard the confirmation of a thing they had been hoping was not true, told her something about the geography of this situation that she hadn't fully understood until this moment. This wasn't Jun Seo-hyun at war with external enemies. This was something closer, something that had already reached inside. Who is it? She said. He moved toward the door. Who is it? She said again, harder. He stopped with his hand on the frame. He didn't turn around. Get some sleep, Miss Brooks. Tomorrow is going to require more from both of us. The door closed. She stood in the middle of the room with the silence pressing in around her and the image on her laptop. The tall figure, the obscured face, the coat, and felt the specific dread of someone who has looked at a puzzle long enough to understand that the picture forming is much worse than the one they... She sat at the desk with the laptop open and the image on the screen and worked backward through everything she knew, the way she worked backward through a shoot that had gone wrong, methodically, without self-pity, starting from the result and tracing the sequence of decisions that had produced it. The tall figure in the corner of the frame, the coat, the posture of someone present as an authority. Jun's face when she had described it, that specific stillness that wasn't composure, but the thing that sits just beneath composure when composure is the only thing standing between a man and something he can't afford to feel yet. She had seen that stillness before. Once, in her second year of shooting, she'd photographed a family in New Orleans whose house had flooded the previous year. The father had stood in the doorway of the rebuilt kitchen and looked at the new walls, and she'd caught his face in the moment he thought no one was watching. A man holding something enormous at a distance because putting it down would mean dealing with what it weighed. Jun had looked like that for exactly 3 seconds, and then he'd left. She opened a new document on her laptop and started writing down everything she could recall about the figures in the terminal yard, every posture, every detail of how they were standing relative to each other, the specific geometry of who faced who. It was the closest thing she had to clarity, and she worked it until the courtyard light outside went gray with early morning and her eyes felt like they'd been scoured with sand. So, Han came at 7 with coffee and a clean change of clothes she hadn't asked for. Dark jeans, a gray pullover, both approximately her size, which meant someone had looked at her carefully enough to estimate. She changed in the bathroom and drank the coffee standing at the window, and watched a sparrow work its way along the courtyard wall below with the single-minded persistence of something that had no option but to continue. At 7:40, Jun came back. He wasn't alone this time. A woman came in behind him, late 30s, sharp-featured, in a dark blazer over a white shirt, carrying a tablet, and moving with the efficiency of someone who had been awake for a long time and had metabolized that into focus rather than exhaustion. Jun introduced her as Dr. Shin. He didn't give a first name or a title beyond that. Dr. Shin set the tablet on the desk without preamble and turned it toward Nyla, and the screen showed a photograph. "Is this the man you saw?" Jun said. The image was clear, professional quality. A man in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with a jawline that had gone slightly heavy with age, and eyes set close enough together that the overall effect was watchful rather than welcoming. She had seen this face before. Not in the terminal yard, but somewhere else, somewhere in the peripheral awareness of her time in this building. Then it clicked. The hallway. 2 days ago. A glimpse of a man moving from the elevator toward the upper floor, a figure she'd registered the way you register background elements, something noted and filed and not examined. "He's been here," she said. "In this building." The silence that followed was the kind that has physical weight. "Yes," Jun said. His voice was perfectly even. She was beginning to understand that evenness as a structural feature rather than a temperamental one. The load-bearing quality of it, how much it was holding up. "Who is he?" Jun pulled out the second chair and sat. He set both hands on the desk and looked at them for a moment, then looked at her. "His name is Kwon Sung-min. He has been my head of external operations for 11 years. Nyla heard what was underneath that sentence, heard the number. 11 years. She kept her face still. He was at the terminal. Yes. With Deputy Minister On. Yes. Doing what? June looked at Dr. Shin. Something passed between them, some negotiated permission, and then Dr. Shin tapped the tablet and slid it back to Nyla with a new image on the screen. A document, partially redacted, dense with financial notations and what appeared to be organizational charts. The Alliance, Dr. Shin said. Her English was precise, professorial. 5 parties. Deputy Minister On provides regulatory cover and government access. 3 rival syndicate heads contribute capital and street infrastructure. The 5th party coordinates the strategy and provides the internal intelligence that makes all of it viable. She tapped the chart. The 5th party has spent 14 months feeding our operational data, our asset locations, our security rotations, to the others. Every countermove we've made in that period has been anticipated. 3 of our logistics operations have been dismantled. 2 of our legal entities have been flagged by financial investigators who should not have had access to that information. Nyla looked at the chart, then at June. Quan. Yes. She sat back. Outside the window, Seoul was doing its morning thing, indifferent and relentless. And she thought about the shape of 11 years, what that meant. What it took to maintain a deception for 11 years inside the proximity of someone like Jun Seo-hyun, who watched people the way a geologist reads rock strata, who had built an organization on the specific talent for knowing what a person would do before they did it. You didn't know, she said. It wasn't accusatory. It was simply the fact. No. One word, the flattest thing she'd heard from him. Until the terminal. Until you described him. He looked at her directly. The photographs give us the first concrete documentation. His presence at that meeting with those people, in that configuration, it confirms what the financial anomalies suggested, but couldn't prove. He paused. Without your photographs, we have suspicion. With them, we have evidence. Which is why you kept me here. Which is why I kept you here. The air between them shifted. She'd understood the situation as protective custody with an asterisk, and now the asterisk was spelling itself out clearly. She was valuable. Not just safe-harbored, valuable. The photographs weren't hers as a courtesy. They were hers because he couldn't take them without breaking whatever calculation he was running about how she'd respond, and he needed her to respond cooperatively. What are you going to do with the information? She said. Quan doesn't know we've identified him. That gives us a window. How long? Hours, maybe less. The terminal meeting was 3 days ago. If he's monitoring our communications, which he is, he'll know by now that something has changed. When people change their behavior around you and won't explain why, you start counting down. June stood. I need to move against the Alliance today. I need those photographs authenticated and in the right hands before Quan realizes the timetable has accelerated. What does that mean for me? It means you need to leave this building with Han and reach the secure transfer point on the other side of the city before Quan's people locate you. He was already moving toward the door with the contained momentum of a man shifting into a different operational register. Dr. Shin will go over the route with you. He had his hand on the frame, the same position as the night before, facing away, when Nyla said, "You should have told me this yesterday." He stopped. You had the information yesterday. You'd already identified him. You came to my room and asked me about the photograph, and I described him, and you confirmed it, and then you walked out and left me sitting with the shape of it and didn't tell me anything. She kept her voice level. I was making decisions without the full picture. That's not protection. That's use. The silence held for several seconds. He turned. Not fully. 3/4, enough to meet her eyes across the room. Yes, he said. It was. And then he was gone, and Dr. Shin was pulling the tablet back and opening a routing map, and Nyla sat with the acknowledgement sitting in her chest, like something she didn't know what to do with yet. They left the building at 9:12. Han drove. Nyla in the back seat, Dr. Shin beside her with the tablet tracking their route in real time. A second car following at a distance she couldn't see, but that Han periodically confirmed with glances at his rear-view mirror. The city moved past the windows in its ordinary morning configuration, and Nyla kept her bag in her lap with the camera inside and thought about the 12 photographs and the chain of events they'd set in motion and the particular absurdity of the fact that all of this had started because she'd wanted to shoot cranes against a gray sky. They were 20 minutes from the transfer point when Dr. Shin's phone rang. She answered immediately, listened for 12 seconds, and then said something in Korean to Han that changed the set of his shoulders. He took the next right instead of going straight. "Change of route," Dr. Shin said to Nyla. Calm, professional, the voice of someone trained for bad news. "What happened?" "The transfer point has been compromised. Kwan's people were already there." A pause. 40 minutes ago." Nyla pressed her back against the seat. "He knows." "He knows something. Whether he knows specifically about you or about the photographs." Dr. Shin's phone rang again. She answered, and this time her face changed, a flicker of something that moved through her controlled expression like a crack in plaster, and Nyla knew before she translated it that it was worse. "Han." Short, sharp. Han was already accelerating. "What?" Nyla said. "Kwan has moved. He's left the building." "Doctor." Shin was typing on his tablet one-handed, her other hand braced against the door as Han took a turn hard. "He took 2 of our cars and 6 men from the security rotation." She looked up from the tablet, and her eyes went to Nyla with an expression that was not quite apology, but was adjacent to it. "He also accessed the residential floor records 12 minutes ago." Nyla went cold in a specific localized way, the cold moving from the base of her skull downward. "He knows which room I was in. He knows you exist. He knows you were in the building." Dr. Shin's voice stayed level with visible effort. "He will also know, based on the timing, that the photographs exist and that June has them." Han said something without looking back. Dr. Shin answered him. They were moving fast through secondary streets now, the kind of navigation that required local knowledge, alleys and warehouse districts where the morning traffic was light and surveillance cameras were a different kind of sparse. "I need to contact June," Nyla said. "He's been notified." "I need to contact him myself." Dr. Shin handed her a phone without argument. Not Nyla's phone, a clean handset, a number already dialed. It rang twice. "You're in the secondary vehicle." June's voice. Controlled but running underneath it, barely audible, the specific frequency of a man absorbing multiple simultaneous crises. "Your deputy director of operations is trying to find me," Nyla said. "I know." "Your deputy director of operations has been in your building for 11 years feeding your information to people who want to destroy you, and he left your building 20 minutes ago with 6 of your own men." She was surprised by the evenness of her own voice, the way the fear was converting itself into something harder and more functional. "How many of your people can you actually trust right now?" A pause. "Enough." "That's not... It's all I have at this moment." Han is one. Doctor. Shin is one. The driver of the second car. Another pause. "I am moving on Kwan directly. I need 40 minutes. "What do I do for 40 minutes? "Stay in the vehicle. Don't use your personal phone. Don't..." The rear window of the car exploded inward. The sound was enormous and immediate, and Nyla was down before she understood what she'd done. Some deep motor program dropping her sideways across the seat, Doctor. Shin's arm coming across her, Han's voice erupting into the sharpest, hardest Korean she'd heard yet. The car swerved, corrected, accelerated. Another impact. Not the window. Something against the body of the car, the metallic thud of it transmitting through the chassis. Han was on the phone, driving with one hand, his voice stripped of everything but operational content. The second car appeared behind them in the mirror, keeping pace. Dr. Shin had Nyla by the shoulder. "Are you hit?" "No." Nyla checked herself anyway. Not hit. Glass in her hair, on her jacket. She sat up. "Han." "2 vehicles," he said without looking back. "Behind us. Kwan's." She looked back through the destroyed window. 2 black SUVs, close, moving with coordinated intent through the light morning traffic. Other cars pulling aside because the people driving them could read the situation well enough to know they wanted no part of it. "Where are we going?" she said. "Away from there," Han said, which was not an answer but was apparently the only one available at the moment. Nyla reached into her bag. Her hand closed around the camera body. Automatic, the reflex of 200 assignments, the reaching for the instrument. She pulled it out. Han saw it in the mirror. "What are you doing?" he said. She turned and shot back through the destroyed window at the two pursuing vehicles. 3 frames, 4, the camera moving with the swerving car, the autofocus working in the gray morning light. She wasn't thinking about why. She was thinking in images, in documentation, in the evidence-producing logic of someone who had spent 4 years pointing a lens at the world's difficult things and bearing witness to them. "Miss Brooks?" Han's voice had a new quality. "I know," she said. "Drive." They lost the second vehicle somewhere in a warehouse district east of Seongdong-gu. The car behind them cut off by a delivery truck pulling into the road, and by the time the route was clear again, Han had taken them through 3 turns that doubled back and cross-threaded their trail with the competence of someone who had done this before in this city. The first pursuing vehicle stayed with them for another 7 minutes and then fell back. Whether because they'd lost the thread or because they'd received new instructions, there was no way to know. Han pulled into an underground car park beneath a commercial building and stopped the engine, and the 3 of them sat in the sudden silence of the concrete structure, breathing. Nyla looked at the photographs she'd just taken. The 2 SUVs, partially visible through the broken window, license plates readable on 2 of the 4 frames. She had a face in the passenger window of the lead vehicle, partial, half obscured by the movement, but there. She had been here before, not literally, but the feeling, the specific sensation of finding an image in the chaos, of the camera doing the thing it did best exactly when everything else was at its worst. She'd been here before, and it was the only familiar thing in the room. She lowered the camera and looked at Dr. Shin. "Where is Kwon going?" she said. Dr. Shin was already on the tablet. "We don't know. He moved with 6 men. He compromised the transfer point. He accessed the residential records to confirm I exist. That's not someone running." Nyla thought about the geometry of it, the way the pursuit had felt. Fast, but not desperate. Organized. Purposeful. "He's moving toward something, not away." Dr. Shin looked up slowly. "He took 6 men," Nyla said again. "Not enough to take on June directly, but enough to take one person who isn't expecting it." She watched Dr. Shin's face, watched the calculation running behind her eyes, and felt the conclusion arriving before it was spoken. "Who does June have left that Kwon would know about? Who is June's—" Dr. Shin was already dialing. The call went to voicemail. She dialed again. Voicemail. A 3rd number. This one answered, a male voice, 2 sentences, and Dr. Shin's composure cracked. Not much, not dramatically, just a fractional collapse in the set of her jaw, the thing beneath finally showing through. "What?" Nyla said. "Director June's location was accessed from an internal server 12 minutes ago." "Doctor." Shin lowered the phone. "Someone told Kwon where he was going." Han hit the steering wheel once with the heel of his hand. The sound of it rang off the concrete ceiling of the car park. Nyla sat with the camera in her lap and the broken glass still caught in the folds of her jacket, and thought about Jun Seo-hyun moving through the city right now toward a confrontation with the man who had been standing next to him for 11 years. A confrontation he believed he was controlling, not knowing that his location was already known, that the 40 minutes he'd asked for had been sold to the man he was hunting before he'd even finished asking for them. She thought about the thing he'd said to her. Enough. How many people could he trust? Enough. She opened the camera and looked at the partial face in the passenger window of the lead vehicle. She zoomed in on it with the camera's display, pushing the resolution to its edge. The jaw, the set of the eyes. Something about the angle of the head in relation to the seat that communicated authority. Someone sitting in a vehicle the way a person sits when they are going somewhere with a specific intention and a specific outcome already decided. She recognized the coat. Not the man from the terminal yard, different man, different coat. But the same quality of garment, the same deliberate utility, and beneath the coat, just visible at the collar, a phone pressed to the ear and the turned angle of the face suggesting that the call being made was not to the driver, but to someone else. Someone ahead, someone who was receiving coordinates. Han. Her voice was very quiet. The man in the passenger seat of the first car. Does Kwon have a second deputy? Han met her eyes in the mirror. Something in his face went careful. His name is Lee Byung-ho, Han said. He came up with Kwon before June. He's in that car. Han closed his eyes for exactly 1 second, opened them. Then they're not going to June's location to take him, Nyla said. The pieces were settling into their configuration with the cold, horrible clarity of a photograph developing, the image emerging from the solution whether you wanted it to or not. They're going there to make sure he doesn't come back, and they have someone on the inside telling them every move he makes in real time. The car park was very quiet. How do we warn him? She said. He's not answering, Dr. Shin said. Her voice had lost its professional finish just slightly. Then we don't warn him. Nyla looked at Han. We go there. Han looked at her in the mirror for a long time. He looked at her the way people look at someone who has just said something that changes the nature of what they're doing, the way the situation reorganizes itself around a new center of gravity. You understand what that location is, he said. No, tell me fast. A facility in Dobong-gu, closed textile warehouse. June uses it for… He paused, choosing. Conversations that require privacy. How many of Kwan's people will be there? If Lee Byung-ho is in that car, and Kwan is moving with 6 men, and someone inside is feeding them. Han stopped calculating aloud. More than we have. Nyla thought about the nursing degree she hadn't finished. She thought about Tokyo, the hostel already paid, the contact at the documentary collective. She thought about her mother saying go with the urgency of a permission with an expiration date, and she thought that her mother had probably not been envisioning this specific set of circumstances. Do you have a gun? She said to Han. He reached under the seat. Dr. Shin. Dr. Shin was already sending something from the tablet. Coordinates, she realized, pushed to someone, some backup that might or might not arrive in time. I have contacts in the National Police Agency, she said. They will respond to documented evidence of organized violence at a specific location. How long? 20 minutes from notification. Notification requires the evidence to be sent. She looked at Nyla directly. The photographs you have, if I send them with the location, they move immediately. Send them. That means… I know what it means. Nyla was already pulling the memory card from the camera. It means the photographs go public. It means Deputy Minister An goes down. It means the alliance loses its cover. She handed the card to Dr. Shin. Send them. All 12 from this morning and the 12 from the terminal. She watched Dr. Shin's hands move over the tablet. And then we go, Nyla said. Dr. Shin hit send. The tablet screen confirmed transmission at 9:51 in the morning. 12 photographs from the Yongsan terminal. 4 from the pursuit through Seongdong-gu. Coordinates for the Dobong-gu warehouse. A 2-paragraph summary that Dr. Shin had typed with the compressed efficiency of someone who understood that whoever received this needed to move, not read. She handed the memory card back to Nyla, who put it in her jacket pocket and zipped it. Han was already pulling out of the car park. The drive to Dobong-gu took 19 minutes. Han drove with the specific focused aggression of someone who had made the decision to be there and was now in the business of closing distance, not second-guessing. He ran 2 red lights on secondary roads where he could see the intersection was clear, took the expressway for 7 minutes, and then exited early to avoid what his phone showed as a congestion point, and kept the speedometer at a level that Nyla noted and didn't comment on. She sat in the back with the camera in her lap and the broken glass still in the creases of her jacket, and tried to organize what she knew about what they were driving toward. A closed textile warehouse in Dobong-gu. A man who had run his operations beside June for 11 years and had spent 14 months of those years hollowing out everything June had built. 6 armed men, minimum. Lee Byung-ho in the lead vehicle, which meant command-level coordination. And June inside, moving toward a confrontation he thought he controlled, not knowing his location had been sold to the man he was hunting 30 minutes before he arrived. She thought about the 40 minutes he'd asked for. He hadn't had 40 minutes. He'd had less than 20. Han. She leaned forward. When we get there, what does the building look like? Single story. Former industrial. Large floor space. Minimal interior partition. Loading bays on the northern side, personnel entry on the east. He checked his mirror. It's been used by the organization for 3 years. Kwan knows the layout as well as anyone. Which means he knows where June would position himself inside. Yes. And where the exits are. Yes. She sat back. The city outside the windows was transitioning from the commercial density of central Seoul to something more peripheral. Lower buildings, wider streets, the occasional gap of unused land between structures. The sky had gone the color of old pewter, the kind of overcast that sat low and close and made distances feel compressed. Her phone buzzed. The clean handset Dr. Shin had given her. She answered. The NPA contact confirmed receipt. Doctor. Shin's voice from the car behind them. They'd split into two vehicles at the car park exit, Dr. Shin with the second driver following a parallel route. They're mobilizing. Estimated response is 17 minutes from now. 17 minutes. What's our ETA? Nyla said to Han. 8. 9 minutes alone inside whatever was happening in that warehouse before the police arrived. She didn't say that out loud. She didn't need to. Han's jaw was set in a way that communicated he was already doing the same arithmetic. She put the phone in her pocket and held the camera in both hands and felt the weight of it. 600 grams, roughly, the Fujifilm body with the zoom lens attached, worn smooth on the grip from 4 years of this exact contact, this exact pressure of her hands around a thing that had become a kind of extension of herself. She thought about what it was and what it wasn't. It was not a weapon. It was not armor. It was an instrument for making the world's difficult things visible and permanent, for taking the formless rush of events and fixing them into something that could be looked at, that could be used, that could not be unseen. She thought, that's what I do. When I don't know what else to do, I point this at the thing and I make it visible. The car slowed. Yet, the warehouse sat at the end of a service road behind a concrete wall topped with wire that had been cut in one section and pushed back. Han stopped the car 50 meters from the wall and killed the engine, and the three of them, Han, Nyla, and the second driver who had materialized from behind them and whose name she still didn't know, sat in the silence of the car and listened. Sounds from beyond the wall. Not gunfire. Not yet. Voices. Clipped. The metallic sound of movement over concrete. The brief electronic squawk of a communication device being used. Han checked his weapon with the quiet, habitual motion of long practice and looked at Nyla in the mirror. You stay behind me. You don't go forward of my position. If I say down, you are down immediately. No conversation. Yes. If something happens to me, he paused. You go back to the car. You lock the door. You wait for Dr. Shin's people. Understood. He didn't look like he believed her. She didn't blame him. The section of cut wire was wide enough to move through without the fence catching at them. Han went first, low and controlled, his body moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this on surfaces other than carpeted offices. The second driver, she'd decided to call him Minho, the name from the original phone call that felt attached to someone of his composure, followed, and Nyla came last and straightened on the other side of the wall and felt the cold air off the concrete structure hit her face. The warehouse was 40 meters ahead. Steel and concrete, roof slightly bowed from age, one loading bay door standing partially open. Two of Kwan's SUVs parked at angles near the northern side, doors open, empty, which meant the men were inside. From the eastern personnel entrance, 20 meters to their left, she could hear it now. Not voices anymore. Something lower, more sustained. The particular acoustic signature of a confrontation that had already started. Han moved toward the eastern entrance. Nyla stayed 3 steps behind him, matching his pace, keeping low because he was keeping low. Her camera pressed against her chest to stop it swinging. Minho flanked right. They reached the entrance wall and Han pressed his back to it and looked at her once, a look that said everything it needed to, and then went in. The interior of the warehouse was enormous and terrible, and lit by 4 industrial lights suspended from the roof that turned everything below them a harsh, shadowless white and left the periphery in a gray murk. The floor was bare concrete, the smell of it, old oil, metal, cold stone, filling the space with a quality of finality, as if the building itself had been designed for moments of irreversible consequence. There were bodies on the floor, not dead. 2 men down, one not moving, and one moving slowly, both of June's. She could tell by the configuration. 3 of Kwan's men were positioned at intervals across the floor, weapons drawn, attention focused on the center of the space. In the center of the space, June. He was on his feet, barely. His right hand was pressed against his side, and she could see from 30 meters away what that meant. The way the dark fabric of his coat absorbed it, the way his posture had compensated, the left shoulder dropping fractionally lower, the weight redistributed with the unconscious arithmetic of a body managing damage. His face was expressionless. His eyes were moving between the three armed men with the systematic measuring attention of someone counting down to a decision. Facing him, 8 feet away, close enough that the distance between them was more symbolic than tactical, Kwon Sung-min, 11 years. He didn't look like a traitor, which Nyla supposed was the operational requirement. He looked like a man in his mid-40s who had just completed something he'd been working on for a long time and hadn't yet decided how he felt about it. His weapon was in his right hand, held low, not raised, a gesture of control rather than threat. We're past the threat stage. This is the administration of an outcome. Han, Kwon said, without looking away from June. His voice carried easily in the industrial space. You brought the photographer. A pause. That's either very smart or very stupid, and I'm genuinely uncertain which. Han said nothing. It doesn't matter. Kwon finally moved his eyes from June to Nyla, and she felt the quality of that attention. Not malicious, which would have been almost easier to handle, but the flat professional interest of someone doing triage on a situation. The photographs have already been sent. I know that. It's inconvenient, but it's not fatal. The NPA contact that Dr. Shin used has been on our payroll for 6 months. He let that land. They won't be responding today. The cold moved through Neela's chest, and this time didn't leave. The thing about a plan, Kwon continued, addressing the room with the measured quality of a man who had spent years in briefings and had internalized the rhythms of them, is that it accommodates multiple outcomes. This outcome, he gestured slightly, indicating June, the floor, the configuration of armed men, was always inside the plan. It just required patience. June spoke for the first time since she'd entered. 14 months, he said. His voice was level, and it cost him something. She could hear it, the slight constriction, the management of whatever was happening in his side. You were in my building, my operations, my... He stopped, recalibrated. Why? Kwon looked at him, and something in Kwon's face changed very slightly. Not guilt, nothing as clean as guilt, but the complex expression of a man who had maintained a performance for 11 years and was now standing on the other side of it and was not entirely certain how it felt to be here. Because the structure was wrong, he said. You built something that could only exist by holding it personally. No succession, no transition, no legitimate path forward. It wasn't an organization. It was a monument to one man's control. A pause. I tried to tell you, in 2021, in 2022, you listened the way you listened to everything. You absorbed it, and you filed it, and you made no change. So you sold me to a coalition of people who would have used everything I built to restructure it. Kwon's voice sharpened. The alliance isn't about destroying what you built. It's about taking it out of your hands. Those are the same thing, June said. The two men looked at each other across 8 feet of concrete floor, and Nyla thought, this is what 11 years of proximity looks like when it ends. Not explosive, not pure rage, something more corrosive, the specific grief of a betrayal that required the betrayer to understand the target perfectly, which meant the target had been genuinely known, and the knowing had not been enough to produce loyalty. She raised her camera. She didn't think about it. She shot. 3 frames, 4, the industrial light making everything brutally clear, June's face in 3/4 profile, the held wound, the specific quality of his expression which was not defeat and not despair, but the hard, stripped-down look of a man who has removed everything non-essential and is operating on what remains. Kwon in the background, slightly soft, the weapon in his hand. Kwon looked at her. Put that down, he said. She shot 1 more frame. Miss Brooks. His voice had changed register, the briefing room quality gone. I will not ask again. One of the 3 positioned men moved toward her. Han moved to intercept, and the space between them compressed instantly into something violent. Han's body and the other man's body making contact, the sound of it harsh and immediate. And then Minho was moving from the right flank, and the configuration of the room shattered into simultaneous motion. Nyla dropped to one knee. Not conscious strategy, instinct, the same motor program that had dropped her to the pavement outside Club Elysium. And the body knowing before the brain. The man closest to her swung wide of where she'd been standing, and she moved right, fast, toward the cover of a structural pillar 6 meters away, and she was running before she registered that she was running. The camera in her right hand and her left arm pumping, the sound of the space filling up with collisions and voices, and the specific hard impacts of bodies and furniture. She reached the pillar and put her back to it and breathed. Han had the man who'd moved toward her against the floor. Minho was dealing with a second. The third had moved to a flanking position and was tracking Nyla's position around the pillar. She could see his feet from the pillar's edge, could hear his breathing, close enough that the sound of it was distinct from everything else. June had moved. While the room broke open, while everyone's attention fragmented, June had closed the 8 feet between himself and Quan with the contained violence of a man spending everything he had left in a single expenditure. She couldn't see it from behind the pillar. She could hear it. The sound of impact. Quan's voice, a single hard syllable of surprise. Something hitting the floor. The third man's feet stopped moving. She looked around the pillar's edge. Quan was against the wall, June's forearm across his chest, the weapon gone. Somewhere on the floor between them, kicked or dropped. It didn't matter. Quan's face had rearranged itself from its composed administrative expression into something raw, something that recognized the specificity of this position, this man, this particular weight of physical proximity after years of standing beside each other. June sighed. She could see it from here. The dark stain had spread, the coat absorbing what it could. His forearm against Quan's chest was shaking slightly with the effort of maintaining the force of it. The third man had his weapon up, tracking June. Not Quan, June. The shot was clear. He was 6 meters away and the angle was unobstructed, and he was looking at his target with the focused, pre-mechanical expression of someone who has received an order and is completing it. Nyla stepped out from the pillar. She stepped directly into the man's sightline, putting herself between him and June, and she raised the camera and she said, "I'm broadcasting live." She was not broadcasting live. She did not have a live broadcast capability on a Fujifilm X-T4. She had a camera that took still photographs, and she was standing in a warehouse in Dobong-gu with glass still caught in the folds of her jacket and her knee aching from 3 days ago, and she was lying with the specific conviction of someone who has decided that the lie is the only available instrument. The man hesitated. 1 second. 2. "Every frame I shoot is transmitting to an external server," she said. Her voice came out flat and certain. She was astonished by it. "Your face." His face. "This room. If anything happens to any person in this room, everything I've shot in the last 4 minutes goes to 6 separate media contacts simultaneously." She kept the camera up, kept shooting as she spoke, the shutter sound filling the space with its mechanical certainty. "Or you put it down." The man looked at Quan. Quan looked at the camera. He looked at Nyla. And something in his expression, that complex post-performance expression of a man standing on the other side of 11 years, shifted again, and she couldn't read it entirely, but somewhere in it was the calculation of a man who had spent 14 months building a plan and was now watching it interact with a variable he hadn't modeled. "Lee," Quan said the name quietly. From the eastern entrance, the way they'd come in, Lee Byung-ho moved into the light. He'd been there the whole time, she realized, positioned at the entrance, the command position, watching the room. His face was the one she'd photographed through the broken car window, and seeing him fully now, the build, the posture, the way he carried himself with the specific authority of someone who had stood beside power long enough to absorb its qualities, she understood that she had been right about the coat. Lee Byung-ho looked at the tableau, June against the wall with Quan, Han and Minho standing over 2 incapacitated men, the third man with his weapon in an uncertain position, Nyla in the center of the floor with a camera. He looked at the camera for a long time. "It's not transmitting," he said. "You don't know that," Nyla said. "I know the model. Fujifilm X-T4, no onboard cellular." He took 2 steps forward. "You're bluffing." She kept her face still, kept shooting. The shutter sound, mechanical and precise, filling the silence between them. "Maybe," she said, But the photographs I sent an hour ago have already reached the National Police Agency, 3 international wire services, and a journalist in Tokyo I've been working with for 2 years. She watched his face. The story is already out, Deputy Minister On. The hard drive exchange. Your vehicles from this morning's pursuit. She took one step toward him, which she knew was either the bravest or the most reckless thing she had ever done in 29 years. The only question right now is whether the photographs from inside this warehouse add to that story or end it. Lee Byung-ho looked at Kwon. Kwon looked at June. June looked at no one. He was looking at the floor to his left, and Nyla recognized what that meant. A man holding himself together through the sheer mechanical force of will, the body informing on itself, the wound in his side making its case against everything he was trying to do. June, she said his name, first name, without the prefix, without the distance of formality, and it landed in the room differently than anything else had. A different register, intimate and declarative, cutting through the architecture of threat and counter-threat. How long do you need? He looked up. How long? She said again. He understood what she was asking, the same arithmetic she'd been running since the car park. 17 minutes from notification to NPA response. Notification sent 51 minutes ago, which meant response was already past due, which meant either the contact was compromised as Kwon claimed, or they were coming and the minutes were... Han's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. A very slight settling, a fraction of tension releasing, the specific adjustment of a man whose calculation has just been revised in a direction he can work with. Dr. Shin, he said. He looked at Nyla. Her contact is a different channel, not the one Kwon owns. A pause. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Lee Byung-ho heard it. His eyes moved between Han and the entrance behind him, and Nyla and the room with the particular speed of a man doing rapid triage on a situation that had just changed shape. Kwon, he said. Kwon didn't answer. He was looking at June, not with hatred, which would have been simpler, with something more difficult, the expression of a man who has just reached the end of the long road he chose to walk and is standing at its terminus and finding that the view from here looks different than he'd imagined when he started. You were wrong, June said quietly. Not an accusation, something flatter and more final. About which part? About what I would have done, if you'd asked me differently. June's voice was very low, just between them, the room having gone oddly still around this two-person conversation at its center. 2021, 2022. You didn't wait long enough. Kwon looked at him. You never told me, June said, that you were thinking about leaving. Something moved through Kwon's face then, brief and almost invisible, and Nyla shot it, the camera finding the moment the way it always found moments, the precise fraction of a second in which a person's interior life surfaced through their architecture and was visible before they could recall it. Then the sound of vehicles outside cut through the heavy air of the warehouse, and Lee Byung-ho made his decision. He turned and moved toward the eastern entrance and stopped because there were people coming through it. Not police, not yet, but 3 men she hadn't seen before. Han's people, or Dr. Shin's, moving in with the coordinated certainty of individuals who had been given a location and a purpose, and had used both. Lee Byung-ho assessed the doorway, assessed the room, assessed Kwon against the wall with June's forearm across his chest, and Han standing with his weapon now clearly visible, and Nyla in the center of the floor with the camera still raised. He put his weapon down on the concrete floor carefully and stepped back from it. The third man, still in his flanking position, watched his commander do this, and then looked at his own weapon with the specific uncertainty of a soldier whose chain of command has just made a decision he hadn't been prepared for, and then he put his weapon down too. The room breathed. June released Kwon, not a gesture of mercy. He simply let his arm drop, and the drop told everything about what it cost him, the arm coming down with the weight of a man who had been running on a deadline, and the deadline had passed. He turned from the wall and took 2 steps and stopped, and Nyla crossed the floor to him because something in the way he stopped told her he was at the exact edge of what his body was still willing to do. She got her shoulder under his left arm before he went down. He was heavier than she expected. The weight of him, real, immediate, the physical specificity of a man in crisis, the heat of him through the coat, The controlled sound of his breathing, which was not controlled at all, but was the closest approximation his body could still manage, pressed against her, and she widened her stance and held it. "I've got you," she said. He didn't answer. His hand found her shoulder and gripped it, and she felt the force of that grip, what it was actually communicating, not just physical support, but the specific communication of a man who had spent his entire adult life constructing a world in which he didn't need to be held up, and was now being held up, and had no architecture left for resisting it. Outside, the first siren became audible. Then two more. Then the sound of vehicles on the service road, doors opening, voices giving instructions in Korean, with the clipped cadence of people moving towards something they'd been directed to with authority and purpose. Kwon Sung-min sat down on the floor of the warehouse with his back against the wall, his weapon 5 meters away on the concrete, and looked at the industrial lights overhead with the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere and is doing the arithmetic of how he got here. Lee Byung-ho stood near the eastern entrance with his hands visible, and his face arranged into the particular blankness of someone waiting for what comes next. Nyla stood in the center of the warehouse floor with Jun Seo-hyun's weight against her shoulder, and her camera in her other hand, and she looked through the viewfinder at the room, at the bodies on the floor, and the weapons at rest on the concrete and the light coming hard and white from the industrial fixtures overhead. And the shutter closed on the room, Kwon against the wall, Lee Byung-ho at the entrance, Han and Minho standing over the men on the floor, the weapons resting on concrete with the particular inertness of things that have exhausted their purpose. And then she lowered the camera because the room had stopped being something she needed to document and had started being something she needed to survive. Jun's weight against her shoulder was real and immediate, and getting heavier by degrees. "Can you walk?" she said. "Yes." He said it the way a man says a thing he is choosing to make true. She kept her shoulder under his arm anyway. The first officers came through the eastern entrance 30 seconds later. National Police Agency, 4 of them, then more behind, moving through the space with weapons drawn and voices giving commands that Nyla couldn't translate, but whose meaning was legible in the way everyone in the room responded to them. Kwon didn't move from the floor. Lee Byung-ho put his hands up with practiced efficiency. The 2 men Han had put down were already restrained. A senior officer, older, plainclothes over body armor, the look of someone who had been briefed in a vehicle and was completing the picture now in person, crossed the floor to Han and spoke in rapid Korean, and Han answered with the compressed precision of a man delivering a prepared statement. He gestured toward Nyla twice during the exchange. The officer looked at her both times with the evaluating attention of someone incorporating a variable into an existing calculation. "Dr. Shin's contact," Han said to Nyla. "Senior Inspector Yu. He's the channel she used, not the compromised one." He paused. "He's been investigating the alliance for 7 months independently. What you sent this morning?" He glanced at June. "It completed the case he couldn't close." Nyla absorbed this. 7 months. Someone inside the system had been working the same problem from the other direction, in the dark, without knowing the photographs existed. She thought about the 12 frames from the terminal yard and what they'd meant, not just evidence for June's use, not just personal protection, but the closing piece of something that had been assembling itself for most of a year without her knowledge. She thought about the nursing degree again, and this time the thought made her almost laugh, and she understood that the almost laugh was her body metabolizing shock in the only way it currently had available. "He needs a hospital," she said to Han, meaning June. Han spoke to the senior inspector. The inspector spoke into his radio. The ambulance took 12 minutes. In those 12 minutes, Nyla sat on the floor beside June with her back against a structural pillar and her camera in her lap and watched the NPA process the room around them. She watched them photograph the weapons. She watched them place Lee Byung-ho in restraints and walk him out through the eastern entrance. She watched 2 officers help Kwon Sung-min to his feet, and she watched Kwon's face during this, looking for something she couldn't name, an expression that would tell her what 11 years of constructed loyalty felt like when it concluded. What she found was less readable than she'd hoped. Kwon was somewhere interior, his face arranged around an inward focus, a man reckoning with an accounting that was too complex to complete in the time available. At the entrance, he stopped. He looked back at June across the length of the warehouse. June was looking at him. Neither of them said anything. The distance between them, 20 meters, the length of the space, the width of 11 years and 14 months, and everything that had been built and dismantled in between, was not the kind of distance that words made smaller. They looked at each other for 3 seconds, and then the officers moved Quan through the door, and the light from outside cut across the concrete, and then the door swung back and the light was gone. June turned his head forward and closed his eyes. "Hey, Nyla." He opened them. "Stay with me," she said. "I'm here." His voice was quiet, rough-edged, stripped of its usual administrative precision. Just his voice, the man underneath the construction. She reached over and pressed her hand against his side, over the coat, applying the flat, direct pressure that was the only useful thing she could do at this moment. He didn't react to the pain of it, which told her something about his tolerance for pain and something about the extent of the injury both. "I was a nurse," she said. "Almost." He looked at her sideways. "Almost. 2 years of nursing school. Then I picked up a camera." She kept the pressure steady. "My father has never fully recovered from this information." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile exactly. The ghost of one. The thing a smile is before it has enough energy to complete itself. "A photographer," he said, "who almost knew what she was doing." "I knew exactly what I was doing," she said. "I just wasn't doing nursing." He was quiet for a moment. The room moved around them. Voices, movement, the systematic efficiency of the NPA processing a crime scene. And in the middle of it, they sat in a pocket of relative stillness, her hand against his side, his breathing audible and careful. "The bluff," he said. "The camera." "You told Lee it was transmitting live." "Yes." "It wasn't." "Obviously not." A pause. "He almost believed you." "He believed it long enough." She looked at the floor. "That's usually all a bluff needs to do." "Where did you learn that?" She thought about it. "From my mother. She used to tell bill collectors she was recording the call. She wasn't, but they always changed their tone." She felt his chest move with something that might have been a compressed exhale of amusement. "Different stakes," she said. "Same principle." The paramedics arrived. What? The hospital was in northern Seoul, clean and large. The kind of institution that existed in the upper register of the city's infrastructure where resources moved without the friction that slowed everything else. Nyla sat in a waiting room on the second floor for 3 hours and 40 minutes. Han sat across from her for the first hour, and then received a call and left and came back an hour after that. "Doctor." Shin arrived at the 90-minute mark with coffee and a look of controlled relief that was the most emotionally legible Nyla had seen her. "Deputy Minister Ahn was detained at 6:40 this morning," she said, sitting down, "before the terminal photographs were even sent. The inspector had a parallel case against him that was waiting on procedural confirmation." She looked at Nyla. "Your photographs provided it." "The 3 other syndicate heads." "2 detained. 1. A man named Cho. Attempted to leave the country at Incheon Airport at 8:15 and was stopped at the gate." Dr. Shin's voice had the quality of someone reading the resolution of a long story they had been living inside. The alliance required all 5 parties to function. Without Ahn's regulatory cover and without the strategic coordination Quan provided, the others have no mechanism. They're separate problems now, smaller ones. "And Quan?" Dr. Shin was quiet for a moment. "He's cooperating." She said it without satisfaction. "He gave the NPA the internal documentation this morning. 14 months of it. Financial transfers, operational correspondence, communications logs." A pause. "I think he was ready to stop." Nyla thought about Kwan's face when he'd said, "You never told me you were thinking about leaving." The specific texture of that exchange, 2 men on opposite sides of an unrecoverable line talking to each other the way they might have talked years ago, before the 14 months, before the decision. "Was he wrong?" she said. "About June, about the structure." Dr. Shin looked at her carefully. "About some of it. Not about all of it." She turned the coffee cup in her hands. "The organization operated on one man's control because June built it to operate that way. That made it strong in some ways and brittle in others." A pause. "Quan chose the wrong solution for a real problem. That's its own kind of tragedy." Nyla sat with that. The coffee was warm, and the waiting room was quiet, and outside the window, Seoul was doing what it always did, continuing, indifferent, the enormous ordinary machinery of the city grinding forward through the specific catastrophes of the people inside it. The surgeon came out at the 3-hour and 40-minute mark and spoke to Han, and Han translated. The wound was a graze to the lower right side, deeper than a surface injury, significant blood loss, 2 cracked ribs from an impact she hadn't witnessed, but nothing that had reached anything vital. He would need surgery for the internal repair, which they were completing now. He would need 6 weeks of recovery minimum. He'll be difficult, Han said. I expect so, Nyla said. Han looked at her with the first expression she'd seen from him that was fully human rather than professional. Something like appreciation, or its older, more durable relative. You should know, he said, that in 11 years I have not seen him ask anyone for anything. She thought about, please help me, spoken in the rain outside Club Elysian, and understood that Han was not referring to that exchange. He didn't ask me for anything, she said. He let you help him. Han set down his coffee cup. For him, that's the same thing. She stayed in Seoul for 3 more weeks, not in the building in Seongdong-gu. She went back to a hostel, different one, different district, Yongsan this time, a room with a better window. She canceled the Tokyo flight and rebooked it 6 weeks out and sent her contact at the documentary collective a note that said she needed more time in Korea and that she thought she had something worth bringing to the table when she came. She photographed the city. Not assignment work, her own work, the project she'd been building across 31 countries without ever fully naming it. She shot the Han River at dawn. She shot a night market in Junggu, where 3 generations of a family ran a teokbokki stall from 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning and never seemed to run out of the kind of energy that had no single source. She shot a woman in her 80s practicing calligraphy at a folding table in a park in Jongno-gu, the brush moving across the paper with the assurance of something done so many times it had become its own form of breathing. She sent the terminal photographs to a journalist she trusted in New York, with a full written account, on the condition that the story run after the NPA completed its initial proceedings. The journalist called her twice to confirm details, and once, just to say, Nyla, what happened to you over there? And she said, I'll tell you when I'm home, and meant it. She visited June on the 8th day. The hospital room was private and faced east, and he was sitting up when she came in, not lying down, which told her something about the 11 days and about him. He'd lost some of the color that the warehouse had taken from him. He looked, not diminished, that wasn't the right word, reduced to essentials. The coat and the controlled bearing and the administrative precision were somewhere else, and what remained was a man in a hospital bed in a gray pullover, reading something on a tablet, who looked up when she came in and put the tablet down with the specific attentiveness of someone for whom the arrival is the priority. You stayed, he said. I had work to finish. The photographs. And other things. She sat in the chair beside the bed. Her camera was in her bag. She didn't take it out. How are you? Functional. That's not what I asked. He looked at her for a moment. Tired, he said. In a way I haven't been before. He said it without apology, which was the only way it could be said without becoming something else. There's a particular tiredness that comes from finding out you've been wrong about something for a long time. It's different from ordinary tiredness. It sits in a different place. Quan. And what Quan said about the structure. He set the tablet on the side table. He wasn't entirely wrong. I've been thinking about that. A pause. It's harder to think about than the betrayal itself. The betrayal is simple. The rest of it requires something more. More than what? More than I've been willing to give it. He looked at her directly. I spent 11 years building something that required me to be at its center. That wasn't strategy. That was fear. He said the word with the flat precision of a man naming a thing he has only recently agreed to name. I didn't trust anyone enough to let the structure live without me, so I made it dependent on me. And then I was angry when the dependency created problems. Nyla looked at him. She thought about the photograph she'd taken in the warehouse. His face in 3/4 profile, the held wound, the stripped-down expression, of a man who had removed everything non-essential. She thought about the sparrow working its way along the courtyard wall. "What are you going to do?" she said. "Transfer the legitimate operations to a management structure. Executive team, board oversight, proper governance." He said it with the steady quality of a decision already completed. "It's been in process since I was conscious enough to have the conversation. Han is coordinating. And the rest? The rest is finished." He said it without drama, which was how she knew he meant it. "I've been building toward a door I couldn't see for a long time. Quan opened it in the wrong way, but it's open." She looked at the window. The morning light was coming in at a low angle, the kind of autumn light that had no ambition to be beautiful, but was anyway, simply by virtue of the quality of its clarity. "I'm going to Tokyo in 3 weeks," she said. "Documentary project, 6 months, maybe more. Southeast Asia, eventually." "Yes." "I didn't ask for your opinion." "I know." The corner of his mouth moved. "I was agreeing." She looked at him. "With what?" "With the fact that you should go." He held her gaze. "You're very good at what you do. The world is large and you see things in it that other people don't. That has a purpose." A pause. "I would be a poor argument against it." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a very generous position for a man in a hospital bed." "I've had 11 days to be honest with myself. It changes the calculations." Outside the window, the city moved in its ordinary way. The distant sound of it present even here, the low, continuous sound of soul being soul, enormous and indifferent and somehow still capable, at certain angles of light, of being genuinely beautiful. "I'm coming back," she said, "after Tokyo, after wherever the project takes me." She kept her voice even, not because she was uncertain, but because she was certain in the specific way that doesn't require volume. "I'm not saying this to make you feel better about the hospital bed." He looked at her with the quality of attention she'd first noted in the rain outside the pharmacy. The flat, assessing attention of a man who watched people the way a geologist reads rock strata. But it was different now, she realized. Not less intense, but differently directed. Looking at her not to categorize her or to measure what she would do next, but simply to see her. The specific clarity of a person who has stopped performing and is looking at something real. "I know," he said. The NPA proceedings ran for 4 months. Deputy Minister An Tae-soo was formally charged with corruption, abuse of public office, and criminal conspiracy. He resigned within 48 hours of his detention, and his statement, delivered through his attorney in the formal language of a man choosing the least damaging available position, confirmed 3 points of the terminal evidence without admitting the remainder. It was enough. The formal indictment that followed was 47 pages. The 3 syndicate heads were charged under organized crime statutes that the NPA had been building for a decade and never had sufficient evidence to apply. Cho, the one stopped at Incheon Airport, cooperated extensively in exchange for considerations that were not made public. The other 2 did not cooperate and faced the full weight of what 4 months of investigation had assembled. Kwon Sung-min pleaded to a reduced set of charges in exchange for complete cooperation and testimony. He was sentenced to 7 years. The judgment noted, in a section that Nyla read 3 times when Dr. Shin sent it to her, that his cooperation had been instrumental in establishing the full scope of the conspiracy and had materially assisted the prosecution of the more dangerous actors. It was not absolution. It was an accounting of what his choices had eventually produced, set against what they had initially intended, and the distance between those 2 things was the measure of the 11 years. Lee Byung-ho received 9 years. The NPA contact who had been on the alliance's payroll was dismissed and faced separate proceedings. Inspector Yu, the one Dr. Shin had used, was promoted. The photography exhibition opened in Seoul in March, 7 months after the warehouse. Nyla had been in 3 countries since then: Japan, Thailand, Vietnam. She'd shot a story about fishing communities in the Mekong Delta that the documentary collective called the best work they'd received in 5 years, a judgment she accepted with the specific mixed feeling of someone who knew how much had gone into it, and whether that qualified as a compliment or simply an accurate measurement. She came back to Seoul for the opening. The gallery was in Mapo-gu, 3 blocks from the hostel where she'd stayed, which she'd chosen deliberately, with the private satisfaction of a person closing a circle. The exhibition was called Resistance, a title she'd resisted and then accepted, because the collective had been right that no other word contained what the photographs were doing. 31 prints, the Han River at dawn, the calligraphy woman in Jongno-gu, a series from the Mekong, images from Bangkok and Chiang Mai, and a village in the highlands of northern Vietnam where 3 women ran a textile cooperative that had survived a flood and a drought and a pandemic and were still there, still running, still making the thing they made. And one print that she hadn't told anyone about until the hanging. Not the terminal photographs, which were evidence rather than art, which served a different purpose. A single print from the warehouse in Dobonggu. Not Kwan, not Lee, not the weapons on the floor. Jun's face in 3/4 profile, the stripped-down expression, the hand pressed to his side, the light coming hard and white from the industrial fixture overhead. The face of a man at the exact edge of what his body and his history would still carry, and choosing to stand there anyway. She'd titled it, The Weight of Here. She was standing with a glass of water. Not wine, she'd been moderating everything for the last 2 months. A discipline she'd imposed on herself during the documentary work and hadn't found reason to release. Looking at that print when she felt the change in the room. Not a sound exactly, a quality of attention shifting, the way a space shifts when something enters it that reorganizes the gravity. She turned. He was at the back of the room. No Han. No second car, no perimeter, no suits holding the periphery. Just Jun Seo-hyun in a dark coat, hands at his sides, looking at the prints along the far wall with the slow, unhurried attention of someone with nowhere else to be. He looked different and exactly the same. The controlled bearing was still there. That was constitutional, she understood now. It would always be there. But it sat differently on him, lighter. The way a coat fits a person differently after they've stopped carrying something underneath it. He moved through the room without the gravitational qualities she'd first felt in the rain. Not invisible. He was never going to be invisible. The physical fact of him and the history of him were too present for that, but present in a different register. A person in a room rather than an authority in a space. He stopped at the weight of here. She watched him look at it. He stood in front of it for a long time, not the polite 10 seconds of a gallery visitor, but something longer and more interior, the specific attention of a person looking at a record of themselves at a moment they remember but couldn't see from the outside. She crossed the room. She didn't hurry. She stood beside him and looked at the print with him, the two of them looking at the same image from the same angle, the light in the gallery soft and indirect, the distant sound of the city coming through the gallery's high windows in its ordinary way. "You should have asked," he said quietly. "I took it. I asked later." She glanced at him. "You said yes." "I didn't know what I was saying yes to." "You said yes anyway." She looked back at the print. "That's the part that mattered." He was quiet for a moment. Around them, the room moved in the gentle, low-volume way of a gallery on opening night. Voices, the soft sound of footsteps on the polished floor, the occasional pause of someone stopping at a print. "It's a good photograph," he said. "I know." He looked at her then, and she met it, and the quality of the look was the same as in the hospital room. Not the geologist's attention, not the administrative assessment, simply seeing her. A man who had spent a year learning what it meant to stop performing and was still practicing the discipline of it, still finding the places where the old architecture tried to reassemble itself and choosing each time to let it stand empty. "The project," he said. "It's finished?" "The first phase. I'm starting the second in July. East Africa. I have a contact in Nairobi who's been working with me on a story about..." She paused. "It's a long conversation. I'll tell you later." "Later," he said. The word in his voice had a shape she recognized, the same shape it had carried in the hospital room when she'd said, "I'm coming back." Not a transaction, not a claim. Something quieter and more durable, the kind of thing that doesn't require ceremony because its weight is already settled. She turned to face him fully. "I told you I was coming back." "You did." "Here I am." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out, not impulsively, but with the specific deliberateness of a man making a considered choice, and took her hand and held it with the careful pressure of someone who understands the weight of what they're holding. The gallery moved around them, soft and ordinary. The city moved beyond the windows. The prints on the walls held their images in the particular stillness of things that have been fixed and made permanent. The calligraphy woman, the Mekong fisherman, the Highland textile workers, the man on the edge of what he could carry. All of them bearing witness to what it costs to remain, and what remains when the cost has been paid. Outside, Seoul was exactly itself, enormous, indifferent, lit from below by its own light, continuing as it always continued. Through everything that the people inside it survived and lost and found again in the specific, unspectacular way that survival actually looks. Not triumphant, not clean, just ongoing, just still here, just this. She held his hand. The lights of the city came through the gallery windows and lay across the floor between them, long and gold, reaching from where they were toward nothing in particular, going nowhere except forward. She stayed.